All right. Good evening, everyone. This is Gautam Goitrikar. I'm a dentist based in Pune. I am, as all of you, a great fan of cricket, and with cricket comes CricInfo. I moved out of Pune in 1998 for dental school, first in India, and then I went to the US in 2005. And my biggest concern was, how do I keep track of my dear sport? Well, CricInfo to the rescue. And as far as I'm concerned, CricInfo is synonymous with scorecards. And literally, whenever I had access to the internet, the first thing I did on waking up was check cricinfo.com, even before brushing my teeth. Yes, even as a dentist. And as I moved to the US, it became even more important because there was no live telecast going on there. And so CricInfo was the sole source of information, especially live updates for me. I moved away, as I said, I moved out of Pune in 1998 for my dental school. And my biggest concern was, how do I keep in touch with cricket? And lo and behold, the internet had just started becoming a little more common than it was, say, in 96, with cyber cafes opening all over the place. And the first website that I found was cricket.org. And for many, many years, I would still enter cricket.org. And then that became my lifeline. I would just check the score every day. When I had a computer at my home, I would wake up and check cricket.org, and that's how I would start my day. But then I was really, really surprised, because I didn't know it at that point, that it was basically created out of necessity more than anything else by a bunch of grad students and a few undergrad students in the US who were starved to access to cricket. So I believe there was a mailing list coming out of North Dakota. And then believe there's a chat room that was being fed by an Australian by the name of Robert Els. So Simon, why don't you get us started explaining exactly how did all of you gain access to cricket before CricInfo was present, and then what led to the first step that led to what we know today as ESPN cricinfo.com.
Sure. I always remind people, or tell people, remind them, but before CricInfo, there was no CricInfo. News was extremely scarce. I'd take you back to when I went to Minnesota in '92. I can remember going to the end of the parking lot with a shortwave radio in 35 degrees below zero, trying to listen to Test Match Special being broadcast on the BBC World Service. From there, there was a very important person, Professor K.S. Rao, back in '92, and he was a professor at North Dakota. The difference between him being professor and us poor PhD students or postdocs is he could actually afford to put in a satellite dish. So he put in a large satellite dish, and he was able to get cricket information in. And he would then broadcast that on a mail server. Also, other people in other countries would send it in as well. So we get these periodic email updates every few hours or every few overs or something like that. And I can remember writing a script to download those updates down a 300 baud modem, or I'd have to connect about every 10 minutes into the University of Minnesota SLIP system. And I would get an update of, literally, it would be just a few lines, and you'd see it coming in, 300 baud, it would character. It would come in at that sort of speed. So that was the internet back in those days. There was also a chat channel called IRC-Cricket, or on IRC. And that was a channel that a lot of us migrated to. And that was really it was the first time that you could see how wonderful the internet was going to be, because you could now actually communicate in real time with people all over the world, such as the internet was in those times. The internet wasn't all over the world in those times, but you could communicate in real time with people in England or occasionally in India. I think the internet in India probably still wasn't that established in '92. Anyway, and what would happen is people would come in clamoring for information on their sport, because previous to that you had to. If KS Rao didn't have it, you had to go to buy a newspaper, and the information would be 2 or 3 days old. What would happen is people who were watching might just come in every now and then and say, "Hey guys, the score is 212 for 3," or something like that. And then you would have to wait until someone else popped in from somewhere that had coverage.
Okay.
And it was very, very intermittent. It was the constant clamoring, hey, what's the score, guys? What's going on? What's the score? But that was really the very beginnings of cricket on the internet, I would say. From there, end of '92, we started trying to get audio coverage of the game using something called software called VAT, or radio broadcast. And this was software that I think only worked on Sun Spark stations. Vishal, was that right?
Yep.
Yep. So it only worked on Sun Spark stations, which are expensive and few and far between. And it was a narrowcast. So you'd have to broadcast, you'd have to daisy chain. So someone would start the broadcast and then you daisy chain from machine to machine. And I think there was probably about 5 or 6 of us at that time that were doing that. And we were getting this live coverage from, that was probably where I first started coordinating, because I took a central role in trying to coordinate people to make sure we had coverage 24, well, through the night. I can remember myself sitting at that Spark station at 3 in the morning, many a day. Rohan, I can see Rohan was one of those people doing that too. And just tapping away. And we developed a technique for, finally we got live commentary of cricket on the internet for the very first time. And that was also thanks to a guy called David McBean in Oxford, who just set up a microphone next to a radio and left it on. And then he gave me the code to connect in from Minnesota. And that was a fun time. It was a very hectic time. What the problems we encountered with that, though, was that there was no archive. There were people coming onto the channel. I'm trying to think, Rohan, where we had maybe 50, 100 people on channel those days?
Yeah, I think we got up to 200 or 300 during the India-England test there.
Right,
okay, right. All right, so that's a lot of noise. If you can imagine 200 or 300 people in a chat room.
Yes.
And there was always someone coming in, hey, what's the score? What's the score? Well, I just told you what the score was 10 seconds ago. And this was constant, and it was incredibly annoying. That is how CricInfo was born. CricInfo was born as a bot on that channel to keep a scorecard and relay the scorecard. And the first message was message CricInfo scorecard. And that's how it all started. And those messages would come in, and it would come in line by line, maybe a little bit more than 300 baud, maybe 1200 baud. I guess it depends on what modem you had. I actually had a 1200 baud modem by that time, but I was posh. Yeah, that's how. So CricInfo started there as a bot, but it also started with the very clearly stated intention of being an archive, of being what it is today and what it became. The whole purpose was to try and collate all of the information that was out there on the internet about cricket and serve it from one central point and make it free for everyone to use. I think no mention of the bots of CricInfo bot is complete without mentioning a guy called Mandar Marashi. I would say so that there are there are thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, without whom CricInfo would not be what it became. Lots, I mean, on the shoulders of giants, there's so many people that you could, real hundreds, thousands. But there's probably only 2 without whom it might never have existed in the first place, or certainly not this iteration. Someone else might have invented something similar. And Mandar would be the other guy, because he gave me the original. I'm not a programmer. I was an electron microscopist, and he gave me the original code for how to write an IRC bot. And I adapted that code to then put a whole database interface in it and contribution network and all of that structure. One sort of little known fact that maybe has been forgotten from those IRC days is that was the first time we had a consistent scorecard format. We had to go 80 characters wide, and that was it. And that was a lot of the work involved in building CricInfo, was just this formatting, typing out cards and formatting and making sure that everything came in that 80 character format, because if you went to more than that, it became unreadable as it scrolled down the screen. Continuing on from that, CricInfo started at the University of Minnesota on my account on the University of Minnesota machines. It was a resource hog, and sysadmin didn't like it very much. Didn't like it at all, in fact. And after a couple of weeks, just said, "Oi, get this thing off of here. It's got to go." And that's again where KS Rao stepped in, because he very kindly offered space on his server at North Dakota. Problem was, I wasn't a programmer, and I had written the code with all the explicit paths in everywhere, and it was already maybe 1,000, 1,500 lines of code. And so that took me many a night working through trying to make it portable so it could actually run on a different system with a different path names. But what it also allowed me to do, because I could not do this at Minnesota, was bring other people in to help manage the site. Because previous to that, I was the only one who had access to it. I had to do everything, absolutely, because I couldn't give anyone else a login to a University of Minnesota computer. You know, I'd have been, I don't know, something bad would have happened. But obviously, KS Rao's machine, we could open it up. And Murari, who is here, was probably the first CricInfo volunteer ever, I think. There was just that period of 3 weeks, which was really, really hectic. And Murari, I think you got involved probably in week 1.
Pretty much, I think. Yeah, it's pretty.
Pretty
I think
much.
it was April '93, April '93, if I recall.
March 2nd, '93 was when I registered CricInfo.
Yeah, I think it was pretty soon after that. I think.
Right, and then I launched it. I think something about March 15th or something like. I can't remember that.
I think there's a famous post of yours on rec.sport.cricket. I think I compare it to the original post that Linus Torvalds, put out.
Around the same time.
Came up with the kernel. So I think you can still find it on Google Groups. I think they've got an archive.
I think Dave Liverman has it in his
his
history. He's got a very good article on it. But anyway, I've seen on that. Anyway, let's go back to '93 and Murari, because so Murari, I was then able to give you a login, and what that let me do was actually get back to my job, because I was a postdoc.
Yeah. And that's the story of CricInfo. When people get busy with their work, they hand it off to someone else.
Right. That was always why we needed zillions of volunteers. But in '93, I started CricInfo. I had a child, or rather my then wife had a child. And I also submitted, I think, 10 or 12 academic papers that year. I can't remember the exact count, but it was a bunch. So '93 was a very, very busy year for me. And I say, then I'd like to introduce Murari, and why don't you take it from there?
Yeah, I think basically the way I got in was I was around rec.sport.cricket. I was aware of all these things happening. And once the bot came online, I used the bot quite a bit. And I think Simon was checking out the logs and saw that I was using it pretty frequently.
That's right.
And he basically guilted me into, contributing.
He did that to a lot of us.
He caught me on IRC and said, "Hey, you know what? You're using it and you're not giving back, so you might as well do something." So I remember going off and writing a profile on Dennis Compton. I remember that was my first quote unquote submission to CricInfo. After which I got pretty, involved with just the kind of things that Simon was saying. Formatting scorecards was a big thing. And, the whole internet thing this was before the first browser came out. Okay. So that's just a kind of a.
Wait, Murari, for young guns, young, spring chickens like myself, can you explain to me how the internet functioned without a browser? Because I have never known life without a browser.
So like Simon mentioned, the first thing was just you message this bot and whatever you asked for scrolled on your screen within your IRC channel, right?
So it was basically a chat room where you were.
Yeah, a chat room, but you could call this bot and the scorecard would score.
There's another step in there. There's another step in there, because the internet in those days was not user friendly at all.
Right.
It was pretty tricky to use. You had to know how to compile code and various compilers, and if you want to get IRC, you had to get. It was a lot of work, and especially if you weren't a computer programmer. I remember it took me probably a couple of days to figure out how to get on IRC in the first place.
So you can imagine that you had a phone and you had to compile your own apps. There was no browser. For everything like IRC or everything, there were apps that you had to download the source code and compile and then run.
Yeah.
So it was pretty
do a auto config
friendly.
and then do a kind of we all even mechanical engineers like me sort of learned how to do a little bit of that. So anyway, coming back to what it entailed, I think the 93 April onwards was basically just filling out the database as fast as we could. So there were two parts to it. One was trying to fill out, old scorecards, and the other was trying to keep if there was a live game on, kind of keeping the scorecard up to date with whatever scraps people would feed you on the IRC channel. So I remember editing the scorecard, like getting into this server that KS Rao had provided for us, and kind of keeping the live scorecard up to date. I remember creating the India directory, going to the library, finding newspapers, typing in Ranji cards. Every once in a while, someone would, OCR an entire season's worth of scorecards, Australian scorecards or whatever. They would come in really bad format and needed to be cleaned up. I remember around the same time we put up the laws of cricket also online. So there's a whole bunch of stuff happening. I mean, we're just keeping the database up to date on a daily basis, so there was a lot of that. So as you can well imagine, there was not much of an editorial element in those days. As the name suggests, CricInfo, I think we were very hung up on just getting the cards in there. And then slowly we started expanding into creating, so every time a series got over, we would try to compile the stats and, create a little, of course, very, very spotty. It was nowhere near complete, and all of this was done manually. And someone wrote a nice little macro on Emacs, which would kind of take a badly formatted scorecard and put in the tabs properly, so everything would line up nicely. So that 80 character limit or whatever. And also one thing I'll say is that the server would crash pretty frequently. This server that was, I think it was in an office somewhere in KS Rao's office.
Actually, calling it a server is not quite appropriate.
Not quite.
It was an old PC.
PC that ran some
PC 80386 processor.
And ran some flavor of Linux or some
Unix. It was a BSD Unix, free BSD Unix kind of thing,
correct.
which we had set up on that.
And I remember for my lab, I would have to, use my MCI or Sprint card to call this office and ask someone to reboot the machine or whatever.
Yeah.
So he would actually have to walk over to where the machine was and physically reboot it?
Physically
the person in the office would have to do that.
Right. Somebody would have to physically go and reboot it.
Absolutely.
So that was it pretty much. And we would coordinate on IRC. I mean, Simon and every time the scorecard was updated, I would kind of post it on rec.sport.cricket also. So that, hey, I mean, if it was an Ashes match, people would wonder, how come you got a scorecard so fast? And there would be gaps in the scorecard. So there would be some question marks, and then some kind soul will fill in the number there. Or sometimes you had to add up the numbers to figure out what the missing number was.
We were getting information out there within 5 minutes, which was unheard of.
Yeah, which was
pretty
unheard of.
Yeah, so that was it. I mean, that was life, getting CricInfo out there. And then I did something which was pretty much a copyright infringement. I would, kind of find some magazines and copy articles from, let's say, Sports Star or something like that.
We all did that. Yeah.
I think the amount of plagiarism that went
stream,
into the original content database was remarkable.
Given that the original source was pretty much an illegal audio or video stream, I think republishing articles is a very, very minor infraction.
Yeah, no, we had. And we had different sources of information. I think Australia was pretty well connected, if I recall. So there were a bunch of Australians on IRC. They would keep things going. England, I remember, Simon, someone would give us a teletext feed and we would kind of county cards and things of that nature.
It was Gucci.
That's it. Yeah.
I don't remember his real name, but his handle was Gucci.
Yeah. So we would get our information from all kinds of sources. And it was my job pretty much to kind of, put it all together and keep the whole thing going. So that was it. I mean, and it was great fun. It was kind of, and this was all text, mind you. I mean, even when the browser came along in late 93, CricInfo moved to the HTML and the web very, very late. you can say.
Mid 95, August
Yeah,
95.
So,
There was a big
uh,
gap.
There was some
So,
debate over that, as I recall.
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so this actually went on till I think the end of '93, by which time I think there was a lot of activity. The crashes, the machine crashes were more frequent. And I think around that time, Simon, was that when we started thinking of the new server and
It was
finding a
actually
way?
before that.
Yeah.
I actually just dug out something I wrote in '95. The history of CricInfo I wrote in 1995 when it was only 2.5 years old, which was reminded me of a few things. One
so
thing it
Simon,
does say
just
is,
before you read that out, I just want to
I'm not going to read the whole
warn
thing
you
out.
/
It's like
inform you that
pages.
Dave Liverman's actually in both on
Yeah,
audio
great
and
to see you,
video.
Dave.
Hello, Dave.
Hi, Dave.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Dave.
Great to see everybody. Yeah, real pleasure.
Same here. Yep.
Yeah.
But
right,
you missed
Simon, I'll
out.
let you
You
get
missed
going.
out Gopher, because Gopher was the next big
I was
thing.
going to go to.
Yeah.
Right.
I was going to
Yeah,
go to.
we got Gopher around the same time, and then you
I
had
was going to
another
let
way.
Neeran
Yeah.
speak
Yeah, I
about
think,
Gopher.
Neeran, I think you should take it then.
Neeran,
Just before we start on that, I found an interesting statistic. We were averaging around about 100, 200 requests a day. And then when Gopher came along, apparently we quintupled within a week.
wow.
So this was the first massive growth of CricInfo.
Yeah.
So, and I say Neeran was the guy responsible for that.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah,
Neeran.
Neeran, I think you should
All right.
up the story.
Yeah, actually, my involvement started just a little bit before that with the VAT audio relay, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
that England in India test series in '93
Yeah.
is when we hooked that up for the first time. And I was looking up some emails that I found from that time, and it was February of '93. And so it had the relay coming, like Simon said, from David McBean in Oxford to Simon's workstation in Minnesota, to my workstation in Minnesota. And then I think from there to Rohan and Valluri Prabhakar in Stanford, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Valluri was there.
And
Yeah.
Murari was also there, right? It also went on to Austin
Yeah.
in that daisy chain. So we all stayed up all night because it was, of course, the daytime test match in India. So in the US, we stayed up all night typing out what we were hearing on our headphones. So it was good fun. That's how I got involved in the first place. And so like Simon covered, the whole launch of the bot, etc., happened in March. And sometime in the June timeframe, I mean, I was already familiar with Gopher because Gopher was actually developed at the University of Minnesota, and it was used pretty extensively, not just at Minnesota, but many other universities around the US at that time to host their
Neeran,
information.
can I ask you a favor?
Sure.
Can you just lower your camera a little bit so we can
Oh,
see
sorry.
a little more? Yeah, no, that's
Okay.
perfect. And then also, can you just explain what Gopher is to a non-technical
Oh, yeah,
guy
of
like
course,
myself?
of course. So Gopher was a precursor to the web in a sense. It was a similar system where you had a server which would make information available, and you had a client or a browser, as we would call it today, right? So that was a Gopher client. And if you had a Gopher client, you could connect to any Gopher server around the world over the internet and browse what information it had chosen to make available, just like a website does today, right? It was obviously not as sophisticated as today's web, but it was pretty much comparable to the web of 1993 or the HTTP servers of 1993. But it was more popular, actually, and it was more easily available on people's workstations. It was already installed on many people's workstations. So what I did was essentially, so all this stuff that we had been collecting, right? Simon and Murari talked about people submitting all kinds of scorecards, statistics, articles, and whatnot, copied out from magazines. We had collected all of that in a file system, initially on Simon's machine and later on KS Rao's machine. And the bot was running on top of that file system and serving that data. What I did was I just installed a Gopher server on the same machine, KS Rao's machine, basically, at North Dakota. And that same file system became available through a set of Gopher menus. So all you had to do was define what menu you wanted to offer to your clients. And anybody logging into that Gopher server would see the collection of stuff that we had. So we had organized it into directories or folders or whatnot, right? Just a very simple kind of organization. And so in one shot, basically, just by putting a Gopher server out there, all that information became available to anybody who had Gopher. And like Simon mentioned, it was hard for people to download, through FTP sites, their own applications, compile them, build them, and run the applications on their machines. But if you had a ready-made application like Gopher available, it became much easier to connect to the site. And that's probably why the usage shot up in that week, right? I mean, so we had like 1,000 requests a week over the IRC bot. And then the moment Gopher was launched, it quintupled and then doubled further beyond that and so on in no time at all.
So was that because the Gopher was easier to use and more widely used, hence across the country?
So Gopher was already popular. It was already available, installed on people's machines, and it was easier to use because, see, with the IRC bot, you had to know the language, right? It was like a command line language. You had to send messages to the bot in a particular syntax, and you had to know what message to send, or you had to search for files, and then it would return to you what you were looking for. With Gopher, you don't need to do that. You just connected to the server, you saw a menu, and you clicked on an item in the menu, and you saw the next level menu, right? I mean, it was like navigating a directory, basically. So it felt revolutionary at the time. Now it would be pretty simplistic, but it was.
No, but I think it had to be revolutionary because I think it's all about volume at the end of the day, and getting word out there. So I'm sure you're underplaying your role. Correct me if I'm wrong, Simon and Murari, but I feel that was really what kickstarted it to the next level.
It was, absolutely.
It became a proper server at that point of time, essentially, an information server. And it was easily discoverable by others because there were directories of Gopher servers available worldwide, and you could find CricInfo over there.
True.
All right. So I believe this led to the establishment of what was known as the CricInfo management. So who all were part of this exclusive group, and how did it really come together? Maybe Simon can share some thoughts on that.
I mean, I think when I brought Murari in, I think that was when I coined the phrase. Do you remember that, Murari?
I don't. Yeah, I think so.
All right. I called us central coordinators, which sounds very Soviet.
Yeah, you had a whole hierarchy there.
MGMT at csc.ogi.edu.
Yeah. Well, that's later. Because we look at what Neeran did two things. He made CricInfo much more popular. He also broke it.
Yeah, that's right.
And because Rao's computer just could not cope.
Yeah. But I was also responsible for fixing it. I mean, I was the only guy with a computer science background already, right? In the sense, so I was also root on that computer. I had root access.
So you think what happens to that puny PC when there's an India-Pakistan match, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just think the kind of torture that poor little machine will be subjected to.
So anyway, what was happening is the computer would be up for a few hours, maybe a few days. And then Professor Rao actually went to India.
Yeah, that's right.
And so where previously we could phone Professor Rao and say, hey, please reboot your machine, and he was happy to do it and glad to do it. The sysadmins would have to get out of their chairs, stop eating pizza, go off to wherever the machine was and find it, which one it is, and reboot it and all the rest of it. And we were asking for this every few days. And it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And eventually, after one time, it was down for 3 weeks because the sysadmin just would not go do it. And that's where the idea of, I guess, where we started crowdfunding. And possibly the first instance of crowdfunding, I would say. I think we've probably had quite a lot of firsts at CricInfo, and Murari led that drive. So you want to go ahead, Murari?
Yeah. So basically, I think once we decided that we needed a new machine, I think.
Oh, sorry. I forgot one bit. I forgot the microwave oven.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah. What is that?
We had a guy in Oregon, Etienne Barnard.
Yeah.
And he got hold of an old, he had a used microwave oven, and he swapped it for a computer. A Sun 350. He just bartered a Sun 350 for this microwave oven. This was the slowest computer I've ever seen, ever come across. And I'm talking, I'd use computers in the 70s every now and this was incredibly slow. So I had to disable probably 90% of the functionality of CricInfo to get it to run at all on this machine. Basically that period we were an archive you could hardly get to, and we were just serving live scorecards, and that was really all this thing could handle. And during that time, that's when we launched the fund drive. So Murari, yes, over to you.
Yeah. So nothing fancy. I mean, rec.sport.cricket, we basically put out a message for contributions. Whatever you could give. It was like kind of no limit. I mean, you can. So then, the idea was that people would mail me the checks to my address in Austin.
There was no PayPal then.
No PayPal, yeah. So, and I would collect all the checks and kind of, put it in my account. And then when you had enough, I would mail the check off to Oregon once we had enough. So this happened. I mean, in fact, if you go back to the Usenet archive, you'll see my periodic updates on who's contributed and, what the tally is and things like that. And what was the target? I forget. It was a little over
$2,000, 2,000 something. Yeah.
So things went on for a bit, and I would keep these tallies going, and I think at some point we got stuck, just short of the target.
Yeah.
And things were not looking good, and we were just wondering what to do about it. And then finally, I think there was a kind of an anonymous donor or something, Simon. I don't remember how we got over the limit.
WI bot.
WI bot, West Indies.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was great. I mean, once we did that, then,
So Murari, I had an interesting...
We were $500 short, and he just wrote a $500 check.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So when we were falling short, Murari, I was trying to encourage more donors. So what I did was, I put in my, pledge for $5, saying that even if people are willing to put $5, that'll add up. So eventually, I ended up bumping it up to 25, which is all I could afford as a grad student at the time.
Impoverished grad students, I know.
But I started at 5.
That was great, and I walked in to the bank with all these checks, and the teller looked at me kind of funny and wondered what was happening. So and then that was it. I mean, the checks came in. I just kept my fingers crossed that none of them would bounce, and wrote a check for the consolidated amount and sent it off, and that was how we got our first server.
So like Simon said, two firsts over here, right? One was this crowdfunding. I don't think anybody would have done that before. And even before that was crowdsourcing, right? All the data, all the content we were collecting was all crowdsourced.
Yeah,
I mean, all this, in fact, the terminology was not there, like user-generated content and stuff like that, right? I mean.
So Neeran, before these two, I think the biggest first was live updates. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any of the American sports were also doing...
Actually, my biggest this thing is that we should have taken a patent out on that thing, I think.
On a whole bunch of things, right? I mean, even later on, ad serving is another thing that we DoubleClick and Google got into that world. So.
So anyway, so that was the story anyway of Gautam about the server. I mean, and I think
so people just had blind faith that you are not going to use that money for your personal gain, and you're going to actually save.
Like I said, the internet was a very innocent place back then.
Innocent place, yes.
We were all at universities. And the internet was almost exclusively at universities at that time. So you kind of knew where everyone was.
Right. So I guess the way Facebook was originally only set up at Ivy Leagues, so there was an automatic screening, given that it was pretty much more or less people at universities. So the trust level kind of went a little higher.
Yeah, getting internet at home was prohibitively expensive for most people.
Yeah.
And it was only if you were at...
CricInfo was completely funded by university infrastructure. I mean, free infrastructure.
Free. not consciously funded, but
I mean, it's a one-time use business model. I don't think you can reproduce it in this day.
It was the right time.
So Rohan, you're, I guess, the baby of the group, right? You're an undergrad at Stanford in 92?
Yeah, so I was in my freshman year when all this started, and I think always the baby of the group. I think everyone's covered the early story well. I'll add a couple of things. Simon talked about the commentary schedule we had using BAT audio. And I think, this was akin to what's happening on TV, right? When you're rotating the commentators, figuring out who goes with whom. And Simon had that all mapped out, and we all knew, I knew when I had to get over to the mechanical engineering lab, although actually I stayed there all night listening, even when I wasn't on commentary, as you do. But we even had a schedule prior to that. Simon talked about the Hash Cricket channel on IRC, and you had to keep that alive or everything disappeared with it if there was no one left on the channel. I remember Manas Mandal was another key guy in addition to everyone here, and there was a schedule of who would log in to make sure someone else could step away from their computer so that the channel was alive and the topic with the scores and everything was still in there. So there was a whole concerted effort all the way through. But I do want to double down on what Simon did, because he talked about the frustration. Everyone talked about it. One man actually went and did something about it, and highlighting Mandar's contribution, obviously huge there. But that's very classic Silicon Valley to me, right? The ideas aren't unique. Everyone has the idea. It's the person who actually says, I'm going to do something about it and solve the problem that ultimately makes the difference. You alluded to the live nature of the coverage as well, Gautam. I think Gopher was a very big trigger of that, transitioning from what we had was live commentary on IRC, and then we'd update the scorecard probably at the end of the overs, I think it was originally, or even not always that frequently. And then
5 overs, I think, initially.
Yeah, exactly. There was a number of overs, exactly.
Right.
And then I remember when Gopher came about, I think it might have been the Ashes series. It might have been something in the spring before that. I remember thinking, well, I'm on this scorecard. Let me try updating it every ball. And it was the 80-character format, and you had to go in and update the batsman's score, the balls faced, the total, the bowling figures. And I would do that every single ball and start saving it. And I remember someone telling me I was an idiot. I won't name who the person was, because no one really needed ball-by-ball updates for cricket. Now, at the time in context, that made a lot of sense. But that was probably the first time we had a scorecard updated ball by ball, and eventually Vishal and Travis adapted Dougie, which I'm sure they'll talk about, which just was completely another big transformation there. Some of the ways we did this, right? We had bad audio. I remember being on the phone to my roommate's brother in Pakistan for one series, and he would. I was, as an undergrad, right, running up several $100 US phone bills providing live coverage of this match, and he would just shout, 4, and you type up beautiful cover drive for 4, or if you didn't like the batsman, inside edged through fine legs for 4, make it all up, and we had those kind of things going on to just make sure we had live coverage of all of this. And again, I'll pump Simon up a bit, because he made all of this happen and kind of inspired it all. I tell the story, I don't know if Simon remembers this, I borrowed, or he gave me permission to use the CricInfo code to make a soccer equivalent of it called FootInfo.
Yep.
And I kicked that into gear and tried to do the same thing. And I drowned in about 3 months. And we had a good following of that, actually. And it was so overwhelming. And I was just an undergrad, right? I didn't really have a job. I occasionally had to show up to a lecture. And it gave me an appreciation of what Simon had to do on the side of his postdoc and publications and everything else to pull all that together. So, incredible time. I think a couple of other things from that time that are worth mentioning, because we're talking about where we pioneered. Players' interviews and engagement, which I think were the forerunner of the social media engagement you see with celebrities today. Our first actual interview that we did with a player was a offline interview with Shoaib Mohammed. I'm going to say it was about 94. There was a guy called Arsalan who did that and sort of submitted, here are the questions and what Shoaib said. But in 1996, we actually had players in front of a computer interacting with fans to give an interview. The first one I will never forget, it was with Winston Benjamin at Southampton. And it was even more interesting for what we didn't type up, because he had no qualms about airing and sharing every controversy and every criticism of the West Indies Cricket Board. And there are some comments in there, it's still somewhere on CricInfo if you dig into the archive. And it's just questions lobbed by fans on IRC at the time, and he answered them. And then we went into the Hong Kong Sixers that year, and we had a whole bunch of players. It was, Greg Blewett and Mark Waugh and Michael Holding and a whole bunch of others who did sit-down interactions with the fans. And we brought, the heroes into people's not living rooms, maybe dorm rooms or graduate student housing at the time. And you look at celebrity fan interaction today, and you can kind of say, okay, we pioneered some of that at CricInfo. I think the other one, and
that's awesome.
I'm going to defer to Simon to ultimately talk about this, but in that same Hong Kong Sixes, we did what I'm pretty sure was the first live audio and video coverage of sport on the internet. I remember working with a local ISP in Hong Kong, and we built a Java applet that would use a little webcam that we had up on in the commentary box in the stadium, pointed down at the ground, and it would take, I think, 10 frames a second or something, still photos, and we streamed that iterating still photo coverage, so you could sort of see a stop motion of people hitting shots, little dots in the distance, and we had live audio commentary along that. Probably my coolest CricInfo experience was the first live audio we did was Michael Holding and myself on commentary, which is when I learned I shouldn't criticize Ravi Shastri's commentary because it really is difficult to keep talking about the game. But the reason I mentioned Simon in this, because I think where this one got interesting was the year after, and I'll let Simon take over, when Mick Jagger came into the equation, and I think we really changed the game there.
I'll pause it there because we are now getting into 97, and I do want to speak about Mick Jagger, but I just want to dial back up to, if I'm not mistaken, 94, 95 was when the website was set up. And I remember reading Neeran's article where I believe, I forget the name, but somebody approached you about creating an HTTP server. And
Sridhar Venkatraman at Arizona State at the time.
Right. Mathop did it.
And then
Mathop wrote the software.
Yeah,
right.
Mathop wrote the software. Mathop did, yeah.
Right. The push came from a couple of people actually. Sridhar Venkatraman kept bugging me, why are we not trying this out, etc. And there were a couple of other things. Srini Kandala also was another one who was asking about it. And then Mathop, who was on IRC, Michiel Boland was his name, actually from the Netherlands, but a cricket fan. And so he actually wrote the software that we used as a web server.
The main difference that they were offering was the ability to embed images versus Gopher, which pretty much was a text-only format.
Well, Gopher had images, but they were like independent files. You could not embed it inside a text file, right? But that you can do with HTML. And hyperlinks was the other big thing, right? I mean, that HTML introduced that Gopher did not have. We just had text. So we had that discussion a few times back and forth over email, do we need this? And for a year or so, we sort of pushed back saying, no, what do we need? Why do we need images? Why do we need links? We just need scorecards and articles, it's plain text stuff. So
I actually resisted it.
Yeah, I know that.
I actually, because the whole thing about CricInfo up in that point had just been getting as much information out as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And then being sidetracked by things like design and pictures and all those kind of things. I mean, the interfaces that I built an email interface and a telnet interface for CricInfo, and that was specifically so that people in Bangladesh or Pakistan or India, some places that barely had email but could still get access to the information. I think the whole of South Africa was on a 64K line. That was all they had for the whole country. So adding images wasn't something that was a priority of mine in 95, but obviously 2020 hindsight, it was a very good idea.
I think I've read all the articles that are there about CricInfo more than I have read all my textbooks in both the dental schools that I attended put together. So both my mom and my wife have got some serious ammunition to use against me, as does my 7-year-old kid. But so I believe that's where 94, 95 is around the time when I read that a few statisticians approached you, and one name that strikes out is John Hall, who I believe came up with the idea of archiving old games. And I think Vishal and Travis. So Vishal, I went to archive.org and I pulled up one of the old scorecards, and I scrolled down. I literally read every line in it, and I see the words "Thanks, Vishal, Travis." So Vishal, I'm going to let you speak about who wrote that, and then I'm going to let you and Simon talk about.
That was a common thing we would do. We would give the attribution at the end of the card. So yeah.
So
oh wow!
It was actually thanks Travis, Vishal, not Vishal, Travis, but it was there on every card. So there's a story behind this, and again, Simon is the one who was pushing us. So I got involved with CricInfo in fall of '93 when I came to the US. And slight correction to your earlier history, India did have internet in the 90s, before 95.
91, 92 only.
So,
But it was
I started,
primarily in
I
the
started using it
IITs.
in the IIT. So IIT Bombay was where I started using it. I discovered Usenet there. I discovered Linux. I might be the first Linux user of India. So when I came,
You say that very modestly.
well, I actually sent bug reports to Linux and got a response.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool.
So no, but when I came to the US and I discovered RSC, right, through the Usenet, then somebody told me about IRC and the cricket channel, and then I got involved and I started talking to Neeran and Simon and everyone else, and then I started pushing. We should use Linux. We should do this. We should do that. Simon saw that this guy, maybe we should use him. So that's when he got me involved, and slowly over time he made me sort of in charge of all the technical work.
You were probably our first CTO.
I guess we didn't use the name back then, but
Right.
that probably is the job.
Right.
Hey,
So one of the things
one
that
thing we
Simon
should
wanted to
point
do
out,
was
sorry Vishal, just one thing we should point out in all of this which has not been made explicit is that none of us was getting paid anything for this, right? I mean, this is all purely volunteer work we were
This
doing.
is all purely volunteer.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So Simon
so
was,
that-
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So Simon was, he had big ambitions for CricInfo, which came true. And one of the things that he wanted to do was approach the ICC and other cricket boards with what we had. Now, as you have heard so far, all our content was user generated. People would type up scorecards, series here or there, and we had a reasonable database, but it was not complete. So Simon asked Travis and me to sort of fix that. Said, can we get a full scorecard database? So Travis, he was at that time at Sydney. He was, I think he was still doing his undergrad. So he was the other kind of baby of the group. And at that time, Travis could not program. Eventually, he took over programming, and he is now the CTO of CricWiz. So Travis and I went about, trying to complete the scorecard archive. How do we do that? So Travis had purchased this software that let you generate stats for all ODIs and tests played so far. So we figured out a way to reverse engineer so that we could generate quote unquote stats for only one game, which is effectively the scorecard for that game in a raw form. But they had a lot of errors. So over a period of few weeks, Travis went about cross-checking every one of those raw scorecards against Wisdom and identifying errors and fixing them. And in parallel, I started writing scripts that would take that kind of raw dump and convert into a scorecard format that we had created. This 80 character limit. So Travis and I, we came up with the first CricInfo scorecard format V1. And it was, we had to make sure that everything looked clean, nice, and formatted properly. And it was driven primarily by this guy. There was a test cricketer by the name of Hugh Bromley Davenport. He was the longest name in the database. And not only did he bat and bowl, but unfortunately also took catches. So we had to make sure that everything lined up properly. So Hugh Bromley Davenport sort of decided the scorecard format.
Vishal, that reminds me, my name is Gautam Prakash Govitrikar. And, filling out customs, immigration, and passport forms was so much of fun for me that when we had our children, the rule was it had to be less than 4 characters because I wasn't going to put them through what I've been. So I can relate to your pain.
Yeah. So we did that. And so we created, after a few weeks, we had the full ODI and test database ready in our format. Travis had done his checks, I had done my scripting, but our database already had a few of the scorecards. So what we did was, can I share my screen?
We are actually very, very honored to have Sambit Bal,
Hey, Sambit.
who's the current editor-in-chief of CricInfo and ESPN.in. Sorry, he reached out to me earlier in the day when all the social media plugging started, and I requested him to join us. So he's been in the room with us. So Sambit, welcome. Do you want to say something real quick before we get back to Vishal's story about archiving all the scorecards?
I mean, I've heard all these stories. All these stories are, most of the stories are on CricInfo, but just hearing them again just is hair raising. I mean, I'm sort of, I must say, thanks to you to putting this panel together. When we did CricInfo at 20, I don't think I managed to get all of these guys together. I met, of course, I met most of you now. Murari, I've never met you.
Yeah, hi.
Hi. Hi, Rohan, I bumped into here and there. Neeran, I met. Vishal, of course, I have met many times. And Simon, I spent a couple of really lovely days in Bombay when we got him over. I just want to say how grateful I am as a cricket fan, first of all, for you guys for what you did.
As are we to you, Sambit, for keeping it going.
Yeah.
It's what are we now? 27 years?
27, yeah. 27.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I mean, the way I always think about it is we sort of got the numbers into CricInfo and Sambit brought in the words. You see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
That's it.
So you can see a scorecard, right? It's a famous scorecard. One guy got out for 0 in the second inning. Can you see?
Mm-hmm.
Gold Hollies.
Yep.
So this is a scorecard, and this is an important scorecard. So we always had it in our database. But Travis and I, we sort of rewrote every scorecard that was there. So every so this was summer of '95. Every test and ODI scorecard, we generated sort of the fact check, correct, accurate versions. And what we did was now you look here in the bottom. So we kept the original attribution. So whoever had typed up this scorecard and sent it to us, we kept the original attribution contributed by, in this case, this is Graham Rose, and thanks Travis Vishal. So every card had this thanks Travis Vishal, but we kept the original attribution. And when it was an internal CricInfo person who had contributed the card, we just say contributed by management.
Management, that's right, yeah. I was pretty religious about this. I mean, when I used to type up the cards.
In '95, I noticed we had 400 contributors in June of '95.
Right.
Wow.
I wish I could get. I wish I could get the management to write, do some scoring now.
In the initial, I mean, Vishal will talk about the later part, but initially I remember having a VI window open and having IRC on another window. And as I got bits and pieces of information, I would piece together the scorecard and just do a write. I would be right in that live directory and open the file, and I would do a write, and so whatever card was there with whatever information we had at that point in, but that's really crude. Of course, things got better with Dougie and this clean, neat format that Vishal just showed you.
When was the aha moment? When did you guys realize that, hey, you know what, this has now gone from being a volunteer bot in a chat room for university students to now being a legitimate website, which could actually become the source of not just scores, but a cricket-centric website, which had not been done before. So was there an aha moment, or it just kind of was a natural progression that led to the setting up of CricInfo.com in around 95 or so?
There was for me, and it was very soon after I started it, because I understand mathematics, I understand exponential growth, and it was sustained exponential growth, and we were growing 800, 900% per annum, year on year on year on year, and this started happening in the first month.
Wow.
The goal when I started CricInfo was for it to be what it is now. Obviously didn't have the roadmap of how to get there, but the goal was for it to be as comprehensive and to just cover every aspect of cricket that we could. And I guess it was the first time I saw it in action was when Neeran brought Gopher in, and the writing was on the wall even at that point for me.
Awesome.
I think
And then
there's this part of
The
the vision
internet had
that
to catch up with us.
Right.
part of the
Go
vision
ahead,
that
Neeran.
Simon talked about was, I think he used the example of Railways versus Uttar Pradesh, and he wanted games like Railways versus Uttar
Yeah,
Pradesh
yeah.
to also be covered live on CricInfo, right? I mean, that was like the
Yeah,
Nice.
actually, for me,
not
that
just
was the
international cricket.
that was the coolest thing, you know, because when I would definitely make sure
What,
that
wait,
the
Neeran,
basic.
sorry to interrupt, Murari, but what year are we talking about?
No,
Like
no,
in the
this is
mid
all
90s?
We're
1993.
talking right from the
93.
beginning. I
93.
think from the beginning,
93.
the idea was to cover all kinds of cricket everywhere.
No,
So,
but I have to ask you, who was providing the score for Railways
so
versus
hang on,
Uttar Pradesh?
That was that was
I'll
the
tell you
vision.
what was happening. I would go
Yeah.
to the library. You would get these tissue paper Hindu and the airmail
Yep.
versions of the newspapers that would come into the libraries.
I did
It
that
would
as well.
come 3 or 4 weeks late, and I would transcribe those. I couldn't carry a laptop. There was no laptop.
There were no laptops. Yeah.
I would either take a Xerox or something at the copier, come back to my workstation and type those things up. And then I would also try to type the kind of series that I really liked, like 74-75 West Indies in India, or some of the I would get the old copies of Illustrated Weekly and find Raju Bharatan match reports and try and transcribe them and fill them up. And also at the same time, the coolest thing was putting in grade cricket cards from the Australia. Sometimes people would send information, even if it was incomplete, or even all the apart from Ranji Kanga League scorecards from Mumbai, Bombay, and that was the coolest thing, frankly. Women's cricket, blind cricket,
Everything.
you name it.
I don't know if Simon remembers, but in University of Minnesota, we had a library called it's a little sub-library called the Ames Library of South Asia. It was like in a little basement, hidden away. And there we used to get exactly like Murari said. I mean, newspapers, 4 newspapers from the 4 corners of India, right? One from Bombay, Delhi, Calcutta, Madras. And I used to go there on a Saturday morning and spend half the day over there, literally copying down news reports about cricket matches, Kanga League matches, scorecards, and then get back home and type them in for cricket.
And then, if you remember, during the same time on Usenet, I would put out these wish lists to complete cards. So you will find posts from me that I'm missing this, I'm missing that, please fill it up if you can, kind of thing. So yeah, it was this patchwork job that was happening in, let's say, all through 93 into 94. And I mean, and then 95.
But
and I think
again, it's safe to assume that nobody's parents had any idea what their kids were up to in the US, right? Having gone there for grad studies, can I safely assume that what they thought you guys were doing versus what you're actually doing were a little different?
Forget about parents. I can tell you my advisor was not happy with the progress I was making.
We all ran into that problem.
My advisor didn't know I could program.
I would say if my employer knew what I was using the internet for, they would have been very disappointed at the time. I mean, you go back to the aha moment. I just was looking through the stuff I put together on the history, and Simon read it. Like, this was in 1993, related to the fund drive, and Simon very clearly shows the way that he saw CricInfo developing at that point. And I think a lot of us got into it because we wanted information about cricket. We were desperate, and it was a lot of fun being able to go to the library, get scorecards, improve the database. But the driving ambition, the thing which kept us moving forward, was really Simon's vision of it. And that's what really took it very, very quickly. I mean, from 1993, where we were just getting, just got the Unix box, in 3 years later, we were the official internet source of information for the World Cup. And that's a very, very rapid growth and delivering everything we could on the web at that time. But if we didn't have that vision, I suspect we would have potted along, and then somebody would have put a lot of money into developing a cricket database, probably not for another 5 years afterwards, and on the web. So that aha moment was really early. Yeah.
After Murari, sort of mid '94, a guy called Badri came in and became really the COO.
Yeah.
Of CricInfo for the next few years.
Yeah, I think just a quick note. around 94, towards the end, going towards the end of 94, I really wanted to finish my PhD.
Right.
And it was getting, things were getting really, really to a head, you know.
You recruited Badri, that's right.
Yeah, and then I kind of, Badri was around. I actually mailed Simon and told him that, you know, I was going to kind of take a little bit of a backseat and finish my PhD, and which I did in the middle of 95. And then Badri came in and took over and really, yeah. And then like this kind of handoff, right? Every time people got busy, that happened in late 94, and then things moved on. Yeah, Simon, please continue. I just wanted to interject.
But just before Simon continues, Gautam, if you let me share my screen, I can throw up the logo and the website from the summer of 1995 before the logo that Simon's about to talk about.
Yeah.
Excellent. Can you make Rohan the host?
Yeah.
Oh, you're not mean the old cricket stump one. Ah.
That's the one.
Oh, that's, oh no. That was horrible.
This is a classic logo.
Okay.
You got to send it over to me, Rohan.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about Simon's strengths, but we did recognize fairly early on that graphic design wasn't one of them.
Dave, we should share your Sydney scoreboard as well, the front page.
Are you letting me share it? But by the way, it's also great to show because that front page of the website, if you guys remember, we had the graphical interface and the text interface.
Yes.
Separate ways in as part of that.
Well, that was for speed.
I'm still not able to
Murari
share.
is the host now, for some reason.
Do you need to let me share, Gautam?
Oh wait, I made you the host, but now it sort of scrolled and Murari, you're the host. You have to make Rohan the host.
How do I do that?
Just can you click on participants?
Okay.
Click on Rohan's name. Just scroll over to Rohan's name.
Yeah.
And then
Make host. Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to change? Yes. Okay. There you go. Rohan, can you see something now? Good.
There you go. Rohan Chandran is the host now. Rohan, can you, there's a guy in the waiting room that's a friend of mine. Can you just admit him to when you get a chance?
Oh, sure. So I just shared that. You should be able to see now.
Yeah, cool.
That good old logo. That was when we first went graphical on the internet.
There you go. Yep.
And the text-only interface would take you to Gopher, I guess?
Yeah.
I think that took you to Gopher, yeah.
Yeah, I think the early browsers did Gopher also, right?
Xmozilla
they did
connect to Gopher as well. In fact,
I remember writing this HTML in Emacs, this web page. Mathap and I, we were playing with it, and we finally got the server.
And this was the graphical interface, was it?
Yes.
This was the homepage.
this was the whole
Homepage.
Yeah.
Well, we very quickly moved away from this. But,
Yeah, it didn't last long.
Yeah, and to be clear, this
I can't
is
think
not the
why.
logo that David Dyke designed. Simon can talk about that.
No. Yes, no, I'm sorry. I'm guilty on that one. I think there was an even more garish full color version of it. I didn't recruit David Dyke. I'm trying to think who did. Possibly Badri. But he did then come up with a logo, which I'm wearing on my shirt here. So that one, this is one of the very original CricInfo t-shirts. Needless to say, I don't think we ever made any t-shirts with that logo on it. And that logo was the one that became well known over the course of the next few years. It's actually Alan Border playing a cover drive.
It's part of a pair. The other, it used to be in the footer of the page. The other logo was a bowler, which was Wilfred Rhodes. So two left-handers.
so to set the context of what happened in 1996, I'm going to play a video. I won't say where this video came from, or I have permission to use this video, but I can't say where it came from.
Sure. So Dave, since we have you, do you want to say something about how what your association was with CricInfo?
Yeah, sure. I came to North America first in 1978 and pretty much stayed. I'm based in Canada and really miss cricket. So, you know, I used to go to the university library to get the cricket scores 6 weeks late. That's how I'd find out about what was going on. So when at my work, when I'd moved to Newfoundland, the internet became available. I thought, well, what the hell can I do with the internet? Let's find out about cricket. And very quickly discovered CricInfo. Then I foolishly offered to do something, at which point probably Badri, but maybe Simon grabbed me. And then for the next 15 years, well, maybe not quite 15, but it was quite a while. I spent an awful lot of time doing work for CricInfo of various sorts, including, like everybody, formatting scorecards, adding news articles, doing graphics, pretty much everything. But it was a very interesting and worthwhile experience. And I think maybe people who are less familiar with this probably don't understand that, to start off with, we were working on terminal windows mostly. And we didn't meet. I mean, most of us, a lot of us didn't meet for a long time. I haven't met in person a lot of these people that I work with on the call who we work with really closely.
That's right.
The logistical nightmare of having to cover multiple games simultaneously from multiple venues. CricInfo had never done that before.
First 2 matches, there were no scorecards. A lot of people coming and actually asking us, like, what is the scorecard? You said there will be live scorecard. That was quite disastrous, and I had no idea what to do actually, because I was, in some sense, the chief operating officer in a sense. I was the person responsible for the database. All that I could say was, put a note saying, sorry, there are technical difficulties and we can only have a scorecard at the end of the match. We actually did pull a couple of scorecards. Atrocious. We were so used to very, very precise naming convention, exact spellings. In a single scorecard, a particular guy will be spelled in 5 different ways.
Looking at the essay.
So just to pause, so what Badri is referring to here, the scorecards that you saw, these we got from the sort of official feed that we were promised from Pilcom. And I have written a whole article about this. It's on CricInfo.
I'll share it. Yeah, I'll share it when I share the recording.
Yeah, so the problem was basically Pilcom, the organizing committee of the '96 World Cup, promised us cards. They didn't really deliver, and what they delivered was awful. So then we had to solve the problem.
X of the way our scorecard looked. It had to be consistent. All the names used to be consistently spelled all over the place. The spacing and everything used to be very, very precise. And you still see that in our cards. But that card was just awful. That's all I can say. When I looked at that card, I said, no, this is not happening.
Sorry guys, we will keep providing you with whatever updates possible. End of the day, we will give you a match score.
Because of all the advanced publicity that we did and the expectation of the people, the first night of this the World Cup, even when we didn't really have live scorecards, the server in Oregon melted, literally melted.
And that was an amazing thing. Actually,
the network got burned. We had so much traffic. It was so hugely popular. So that was both a good thing and a bad thing for us, because now we knew that the world was watching, was expecting. So we had to do something. So we just started doing this, hand editing the scorecards. There used to be errors. People used to get tired. People were in all sorts of time zones, but we sort of managed it for a few days.
Dougie was invented by a South African student years earlier. It was the first digital cricket scorer.
Dougie was more of what you might call a master's level project. For a computer science masters might use that as their thesis or project, essentially.
Vishal Misra had a brainwave, and he remembered Dougie and then ported Dougie to CricInfo's scorecard.
I could always go back in time and pretend that I was doing it to help all the cricket fans around the world. But I was really playing for an audience of one. I wanted the scorecards myself, and I was just making things easier for myself. In the process, we managed to build CricInfo. We were tweeting 10 years before Twitter. And that actually is true. We were just so obsessed with cricket that we didn't think of the broader implications of what we had managed to achieve. But we were obsessed with cricket. We didn't think we had something that would cause a revolution in Egypt.
Things move so quickly, you'll take a night off because you're going out or something.
birthday party or something. Came back and everything had changed, the world had changed.
The first match scores really happened. I think people really went gaga because that's the first time they were actually seeing something updating live, which is in some sense it's unthinkable really. I don't know what I can relate that to the modern day equivalent. That the scorecard will automatically change. I think it was also the time Netscape had the auto refresh feature. You didn't even have to click. You just kept the page open, sat there watching, and it was nicely refreshing, and the scores were changing, and it was magic, real magic.
Fronted with the
So that was kind of the context of how live scorecards came about.
Vishal, I read your article in which you write that you scored the final sitting in Amherst, Massachusetts, with 2 feet of snow outside, and you had to beg the Foreign Language Center for a live feed. And I'll share a similar story that I've experienced in the 2011 final. I was living in Philadelphia at that time, and it was starting. The match was going to start at 4 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I went to a local Irish bar by the name of Tirna Nog, and I said to him, "Listen, the World Cup final is going to be shown. India is going to be playing, so you should broadcast it, and you'll make a killing." He goes, "Well, how much is it going to cost me?" I said $500. He said, "Yeah, I'm not spending $500 for a game I have no clue about." So I said, "Okay, why don't I make you an offer?" I said, "I'll front you the $500. You charge $5 for every person that comes in. If you fall short of $500, I'll give you the difference. But if you go above 500, you got to give me what you make over it." And he starts laughing and he goes, "You're the third person who's come here and made me that offer. Needless to say, all three have been Indian. So maybe I'll do it." So he didn't take money from me, but he got the broadcast. I come down at 3:30 and I get into a cab and I say, "Can you take me to Tirna Nog?" So the cab driver goes, "This is the time that I usually take people from the bar home, but this is the first time I'm taking somebody from their house to a bar. So can you please tell me what's going on?" There were 300 people there in that bar that day watching India win the World Cup. And I feel bad for the group of 10 Sri Lankans who sat right in front of us. They were going ballistic when Jayawardene scored the century. They went even crazier when Sachin got out. And then they were just dead silent. So when I read your story about convincing the local guys to get the broadcast and then sitting in snow scoring the final, I thought of that memory, and it was just amazing. It was a great moment. But so sorry to interject, but I had to share that.
So it was that crisis sort of which led to, you can say, the invention of the live ball by ball scorecard. So I took Ducky. It happened over one night. The story is there on CricInfo. You can read it. When we had created the scorecard archive, Travis and me, we had to again find a way to check whether the scorecards that we had were accurate or not. So, in computer science, you have this thing of creating a digest of a file. It's like a small signature to see if the file is correct or not, if all the bits are correct or not. So what Travis and I did was we created a program which would take the scorecards and compute the series and statistics.
Yeah.
That was our quick way to sort of create a digest, and we would go on checking that the stats match up with what we see on Wisdom. So when this fiasco with Pilcom happened, and then we had to create our own scorecards, we took those old scripts that we had for sort of sanity check, we modified them to generate live stats. And those set of scripts then went on and became Stats Guru. Travis just took them to a completely different level. I'll just share couple of more photographs, and then, I'll end the story. So last year I went to England for the World Cup, and Do you see my screen?
Yes.
So that's Travis and me. And we are looking at his laptop. And guess what we are doing?
Working on Doogie.
Yeah, we revived Dougie. So this is what Dougie looks like. Travis located the old source code that he had, and he managed to compile it. And sitting in this bar, we were
I remember seeing a Java version of this also at some point in time.
Yep.
Guys, for the benefit of the audience, I mean, they may not know that Dougie was this great scoring program where a cricket scorer could actually use this on the command line to enter the ball-by-ball scores. And at the same time, somebody somewhere on the internet could connect to that and get the latest scorecard.
Yeah,
live.
the slave and right. That's right.
So Dougie had lots of sort of advanced concepts. Right? It had what we in the networking world call application layer multicast.
Yeah.
So there would be one sort of main Dougie, and it would connect to a bunch of client Dougies, and those client Dougies would in turn connect to other client Dougies, and this was a way lots of people could follow the score live.
So that's
but that was not the way that.
That's where master and slave came from, right?
We don't call it that anymore.
We avoid the name these days. Yeah.
Master and slave is gone. It's client server.
Server and client.
But actually, pre-IRC and everything else, you could actually access scorecards, which I think it was Peter Vermeulen was the guy behind Jacques de Villiers.
Jacques de Villiers was a student.
Jacques de Villiers. And you could go to someone's profile that you had on the internet, and they had a thing called a plan file. When you looked up their name, it would show their history, and you could type the Dougie output into that. So you could type this command on Unix. It was finger and then the person's address and then .plan. And you would see the Dougie output in there. And this is now late 92, early 93, the pre-days. That was another way to get scores. Incredible to think about looking back.
Yeah, actually, Dougie lived on. I mean, in 99, Travis came to Chennai when we had just set up the office, and he scored the entire World Cup from there using Dougie. And then beyond that,
I must say that we still use Dougie. We still use Dougie for scoring a few remote matches, when
really
actually it's an extremely robust system, because I remember even for domestic matches we would have to get a special line, a telephone line into the ground and use Dougie, and even if the line went down, it would save whatever the state was and sort of recover very gracefully.
Everybody would reconnect.
We skip forward a little bit there because I don't know, we're not including 97, but that was when that really took off, is when we did the ICC trophy in Kuala Lumpur. And Travis and I went down there, and we had to get phone lines installed in these grounds in the middle of the jungle, set up the computer there. And these were crackly old phone lines, which was the brilliance behind Dougie, because it needed next to no bandwidth. It was basically a single byte being transmitted from one point to another. Anyway, that's another story, but dealing with the phone lines and the rats.
Simon, can you really quickly tell us about the Mick Jagger story?
Sure. I did just basically. Mick Jagger's a huge cricket fan, as probably a lot of people know, and it turned out that he was a big user, probably still is a big user of CricInfo. And when he's touring, he had the same problems that we had in America. He couldn't get cricket scores, so he wanted to improve the coverage. He said, so basically I got a call saying, how can I get video? And the answer to that was buy the rights. So he did, because he's Mick Jagger. and then we put together a website around it, which we called Jagged Internet Works, and broadcast the video feed. I think we broadcast a frame every 5 seconds or something like that. We couldn't do full on live because they wouldn't sell them the full on live rights, but we got rights to a feed of single frames. And that was, I guess, apart from Hong Kong Sixers, that was the first time we had international video coverage.
So that was huge. So that's another first, right? Because I guess that's the original Willow. What we have, what people have in the US now is Willow TV.
Right.
So I guess that was the original legal streaming over the internet. Let's put it that way.
Right. I think Willow was around in those days, but it was just cable or satellite or something.
Yeah, Willow came
Anyone
much
know?
later.
Right. Okay. Right. Yeah. Just going back to the World Cup, I was going to say, as Vishal said, the server melted, or the network card melted. I found a little piece I had from November of '96. And remember, the World Cup in '96 was from February to March. Well, in November of '96, we were serving 1 million page views a week. And we were the 30th most popular website in the world. So number 30 on the Hot 100 list of every website in the world. I mean, we were ahead of BBC, we're ahead of almost everyone. Now, during the World Cup itself, I think we were doing 3 or 4 times that amount of traffic, 3 or 4 million a week. I mean,
Wow.
If anyone can actually remember a number, please chip in. But that put us at number 2.
Sambit, I'm going to bring you in here, because now you're more involved on a day-to-day basis. So how can you tell us a little bit about your role in transforming CricInfo and the changes? I guess post 2003, it's now become a completely professional news, cricket-centric news website. So maybe you can speak a little bit about what has happened since then.
Yes, of course. First thing we did was to rip the design, which was so good. But the jokes apart, I think CricInfo. I used to work for Wisdom.com, and Wisdom.com started in 2000, and our aim was to be the #1 sports cricket website in the world. Obviously, we couldn't beat CricInfo because CricInfo had Wisdom.com, of course, wanted to be this boutique website which sort of brought high quality journalism, and we wanted to be a website that people paid for. So it had a subscription of £20 or something. I thought maybe we got 2,000 people to subscribe, or maybe more, but it was never going to beat CricInfo. So if you can't beat them, you buy them. So we bought CricInfo in 2003, and the thing that we did, CricInfo had everything that got the audience, that got the people on it. So what we brought essentially was professional journalism, because as you have heard from everybody used to do everything. Badri used to do commentary, and he was the CEO or COO then. I think Badri was the only person who came on from CricInfo and stayed with us. Travis used to do a lot of ball-by-ball commentary himself.
He was good.
Yeah, he was good. There's a lot of ball-by-ball commentary that exists still in the which we haven't ported yet, but Travis wrote those. So we said journalists to do journalism and management to go, sales guys to go and actually sell. So we did. So what we brought was a layer of professional journalism and brought a network of writers all over the world. And sort of it has grown from there, really, our journalistic operation. And of course, as internet grew and the audiences grew, and we added new servers, and servers used to keep breaking till I think when I was 2007, 2008. Servers were still breaking. I think after ESPN bought CricInfo, servers started. We had stable servers.
That's good to know that the consistency in CricInfo was breaking servers right up to 2007, because we were very good at that.
Whenever I think Tendulkar scored the 100, when did he score the 100? In
Gwalior in
which
2008. 2008.
Yeah, 2008 perhaps.
2008.
Yeah. So I remember staying up. So that's the most memorable match that I've followed on CricInfo, and that's epitomizes the role of CricInfo for me, because again I was living in Philadelphia, no live coverage. All the not legal streams had crashed, and then as he starts nearing the CricInfo crashed, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it did.
So and I remember saying to my wife, he scored the double century. She said, how do you know? I said, because the CricInfo crashed. CricInfo never crashes. So he had to have scored a double century. So to me, when you think about the role of CricInfo in a cricket fan's life, being able to read the ball-by-ball commentary of Sachin's double century kind of epitomizes that. But Sambit, is there anything you would like to ask the panel as somebody who's now heading CricInfo and with all these guys doing what they did way back in the 90s with such limited resources?
First of all, I wanted to sort of tell everybody that we have stayed true to the founding spirit of CricInfo. We try to cover as much of cricket as we do, as many scorecards as we can get around the world. We're still greedy to get as many scorecards as we can. You know, we have somebody, Chandran Nair, who works in Bangalore. He's always chasing people. Can we get this scorecard? Can we get that scorecard? And that sort of, it's nothing to do with how much money we'll make or how many users we'll get. We just want live cricket to be on CricInfo. So that's sort of, I want to assure you, all of you, that we stay true to the spirit that you founded CricInfo with. Questions I really wanted to ask all of you was really future forward looking. I just wanted to ask all of you that what would you like CricInfo to do? You know, if there was one wish that you had of CricInfo, what would that be? Vishal.
All right, so we'll go down. Let's start with Vishal.
Can you get Stats Guru? Can you get Stats Guru on an app?
Yes.
We maybe you should come back and get it done, you and Travis.
It won't take too long, I think.
No. That's overall of Stats. As you might have noticed, there has been small design changes on CricInfo, and that process is on, and it's become a fairly large site, and we are in the process of actually bringing it over to a new platform and redoing all the pages. And whole stats. If you see CricInfo even today, the stats and records are still under the old design, and we're going to change all that. And one of the challenges is to actually make Stats Guru non-geeky and actually get people to be able to use it. You know, new fans, casual fans to be able to use Stats Guru. It'll come. Whether it'll come in my lifetime in CricInfo or not, I can't tell you.
Murari, what would you like to see in CricInfo going forward?
I think the data part of it, there's a lot that can be done, especially with what's happening with data all over the world. I mean, maybe have some kind of a voice interface, or have an API and open it up to other developers to build something on top of it. I don't know. And I also think covering a lot of different types of cricket. I think that's something that should be continued. Local cricket. One thing we did a lot of once we opened the office in Chennai was to have these audio interviews with up and coming cricketers. So actually there is audio of people like Mohammad Kaif and Yuvraj before they kind of became famous, and that was a big thing for me. Actually, that's my kind of even though we were not the greatest in doing editorial. I mean, given the origins. I really wanted more of that kind of stuff. So, and that's happened. I mean, definitely has happened over the years. So yeah, I mean, just a few things like this. Pretty non-geeky. I'm the mechanical engineer. So,
Simon?
I guess a couple of things. One I've previously mentioned to Sam, but I think there are two big opportunities out there. Everything's in English right now. I would like to see some way of getting the content out there in Hindi and Bengali, in the languages that people actually speak, but in the majority countries where they play cricket. I'm sure that we lose a lot of people by not having content in a form that they can understand. The second thing I'd say was reach out to club cricket. If you look at some of these aggregators that are out there now, which are building white label websites for club cricket where they can score and they can keep information and pictures, and they can even start now with broadcasting club cricket. I mean, let's make CricInfo should be really across the all of cricket, not just the top level cricket. And that can actually be self-financing. So those are the two things that I would look at.
Yeah, it's been a great source of frustration for me that we haven't got languages. I know we have been making plans for the last 10 years. Maybe we'll see it next year. First Hindi site, but that work is underway for that. But yeah, club cricket is we have tried several times to get this done. But the thing is, you can actually do it much better if you were a volunteer-led site, because you wouldn't worry about getting one club or getting five. Here, if you're doing it professionally, it just creates that much. It becomes that bigger a challenge. And to be honest, to get get resources to get that done in a bigger organization is that much tougher.
I would say you would get the clubs to do it themselves. It is purely volunteer run. All you do is provide the app.
Yeah.
And then the clubs do it. And you can charge them, $5.99 a month or something like that.
Yeah, yep, Rohan.
Yeah, I will second what Simon said, then I'll go on different tack, because I think, we all use Cric Clubs or Cric HQ, all those things. It would be fantastic to see that as part of CricInfo. And it will be every club player's dream, right, to be on CricInfo. So you would have a great snowball there. But I'll take the pure user tack, and there are very definitively two things I want to see, that I personally want to see. One, it's the opposite of making the stats guru accessible to everyone. I kind of want that SQL interface that I can go in and really mine the heck out of that interface, right? That was probably my dream in all of this from the start, is that we could actually do that. I wish it's not possible that you could go back and create ball by ball archive right from the beginning of time, because when you talk about rating cricketers and evaluating, that's what you really need. I think on a tangent, there a rating system for T20 cricket where we do have ball by ball from the beginning of time. I think you can build some great models around that to really assess players in a way that it's never been done. The other thing I would really love to see is spoiler-free delayed coverage or replays, right? I can't watch every game of cricket, even though it's all available on TV, but I'd love to come in and just replay a game at high speed without first knowing what already happened, and just sort of have the ball by ball stream through my screen and kind of live through those little moments at the end of the day for the games I'm not going to actually watch on my DVR. I think that would be really powerful for people who come in after the fact because they maybe don't have the second TV at work.
For the first one, actually, we do have a ball by ball stats guru running that, but that's only for us. We access it, and we have a ball by ball tool, and we have added a lot more parameters to it. So you can query by length, line, shots played, all that is there, but we haven't really made it accessible to already stats guru. Everybody uses around the world, and every journalist uses stats guru around the world. We didn't want to give another easy tool to everybody else. We wanted that competitive advantage.
I'm happy to take it privately.
And we have actually created a rating system. But no, we have actually called it a rating system yet. We have created this system for 2020 cricket called Super Stats.
Yeah, I saw that.
So that actually is a kind of a rating system where because 2020 is a game where the traditional stats just don't make sense. Averages, strike rates, nothing makes sense. So we have created something that's we haven't really integrated it fully to the website, because that sort of again requires tech work, and we are not run by techies anymore.
Yeah.
Neeran?
Yeah, these guys covered a lot of the interesting stuff. I mean, again, as a geek, I would love to have an API or an interface using which to query some of the stuff and automate. But I'm not sure that's in the best interest of today's CricInfo. But the one thing, I'll just say that, for cricket purposes, the only other website I go to, other than CricInfo, is this thing called fromthepavilion.org. Okay, and so it's like a strategy game. So it's a cricket management, cricket strategy kind of game. So just an idea for CricInfo to think about, right? I mean, where you essentially build your own team, you help groom the players, you train them, and then they play in matches. And then you get to see ball by ball commentary of what happened in these. This is not fantasy cricket, okay? This is different from fantasy cricket.
Is this like the old ultra cricket?
This is exactly like the old ultra cricket, yes. I used to play ultra cricket a lot.
Wow.
That shut down. And now
I had no idea this still existed. That's amazing.
I don't even know. I've never heard of it before. So
yeah, you should try out fromthepavilion.org.
Yeah, I remember sending in my orders every week for my team and how bowling changes would be made and everything.
It's brilliant because these are your players. You groom them, you grow them, and you play them. I mean, maybe it's just a cricket geeks thing, but it still has an audience, I
That's
think.
fantastic, right? I mean, in this COVID times, our local cricket season is off. So my T20 team, I've got a little simulator I run, and every 2 weeks we meet, and we're running a league series. You know, us against all the international teams in T20s, and we have a whole simulation there. And you know, we just get to sledge each other on Zoom instead of on the field, because that's what we do, and it's great fun. So these things are fantastic. Wow, I love this.
Dave?
Yeah, no, there's some wonderful ideas there. I think if you look at what we've been talking about, it was a culture of innovation in CricInfo. An incredible pace of innovation, and even though it was a volunteer group, it was really encouraged. So what I'd like to see for CricInfo is to maintain that culture and to surprise me, come up with things I haven't thought of. But if you want some help, it strikes me you've got a bunch of people on this call who would make a very good advisory group for you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So when I set this up, I was expecting this to run maybe an hour. Then
we could talk a lot longer.
Yeah, I know. So I'm gonna. I think we should bring this to a close. So in conclusion, I'm going to ask all the panelists a question. Very simple question is, I'd love to hear a cool experience each one of you had, cricketing or otherwise, that directly happened in your life because you were associated with creating CricInfo. So maybe Simon, you can get this going. Is something that happened to you, something you experienced purely because you created CricInfo?
That's tough. There are so many. It was a heck of a roller coaster ride for eight and a half years. I'd say when Sambit invited us over for the 20th celebration, that was a very cool experience.
Exactly. Yeah, that was mine as well.
And so that's awesome. I'm actually going to do one other one, which was not particularly cool, but it was fits the mode of CricInfo. I can remember when we went to cover the I think it's World Cup in Bangladesh in '98, and it was the time when we were covering a full member tournament for the first time as in an official capacity for the ICC, and we're trying to bring as many servers online around the world as we could. And I can remember sitting there in the small hours in a hotel room in Bangladesh trying to configure a server in Harare, Zimbabwe, down a phone line, and I'd press a button and wait, press another button and wait, and that was kind of the spirit I think that built CricInfo in those early days of just keep at it.
That's awesome. All right, anyone? Vishal?
I don't know if it's a cool experience or not, but you know, my day job is I'm an academic. I've been reasonably okay as an academic, but nothing I ever do will change the fact that people tell me, "Oh, you're the CricInfo guy." Anything that I do in my research, no. It's always you're the CricInfo guy. So that kind of overshadows everything that I've done. So I guess that's a cool part.
Murari?
Yeah, I think 2 bits. I mean, and I'll echo Vishal's sentiment. I mean, basically, it's probably the coolest thing I've ever been involved in. You know, in my lifetime. I can't call it work, but it has taken a lot of my time. So one is the initial bit when we were setting things up, when there was absolutely nothing, you know, a blank slate. Create the directory, start dumping information in, and you know, see the whole thing grow and take off, and how the community builds around it. That was awesome. And then the second bit was a little later when I joined full time in '99 and setting up the office in Chennai, building it out. That was also fun for a couple of years. So running it also. So yeah, I think you know, everything I have done since then or in between, you know, never quite gave me the satisfaction of doing things for CricInfo. Yeah, it's a highlight. That's it.
Neeran?
Yeah, like Simon mentioned, I think in my case, something that would probably never have happened if I had not been involved with CricInfo was meeting Sachin Tendulkar, Rahul Dravid, Martin Crowe, and a whole bunch of those greats at the 20th anniversary celebration in Mumbai. So that was an amazing experience. And thanks to Sambit and Jared for getting me over for that event. And that's a night I'll never forget. I do have a few photos to remember it by, but I keep revisiting them once in a while, but wonderful experience that.
Lost Gautam.
I guess for me, oh, sorry, yeah.
I think we've lost him. Yeah.
I'll just go tell my story next anyway.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ryan. Yeah.
And this is from the Wills Cup that you referenced, Simon, in Dhaka.
Gautam, you're muted.
Probably my funnest memory of CricInfo times. And I remember I was doing a daily kind of tongue-in-cheek diary of things that were going on around the event, as well as all the coverage we were doing. And there was the Pakistan-West Indies game. And I remember Pakistan went on the field. There were only 10 players on the field. And I think Travis and I were on the commentary. We were trying to figure out who was missing. And we leaned over our window from the top. And there's Salim Malik on his mobile phone below us in the dressing room. And so then Amir Sohail was wicket keeping for Pakistan that game, and then I forget who got out early, and Salim Malik goes to high five him, and they miss, and he gets him in the eye, and he has to go off the field injured. And then later in the game, Salim Malik gets out reverse sweeping LBW for next to nothing. So in my tongue-in-cheek diary the next day, I kind of write about how, look at what's happening here, guys. There's some kind of underhand match fixing thing going on. This is before everything had ever broken with Salim Malik. And, I thought nothing of it. It was just a pure joke, not intended as anything else. And the local newspaper the following day published something in Bengali, which someone else brought over to me and said, look, you're famous now. And it was about how, CricInfo journalist Rohan Chandran, I don't know why they called me a journalist, by the way, but CricInfo journalist Rohan Chandran uncovers match fixing plot. And I remember at the time laughing it off. I still have that newspaper. And then, fast forward a year or two, and all hell breaks loose in match fixing. And I'm thinking, I probably should have been fearing for my life at that point if I had, known what actually might have been behind these comments. And I should be clear, I don't think any of us, Travis, Alex, whoever else was in there, thought that there was anything untoward going on. We were just, the whole idea was poking fun at it. But it's still one of my favorite little, that was the world we were in stories. And, for some bits, for you guys, you're all journalists, you live all that every day. This was not for us a thing we live, right? We're a bunch of techies.
We would have never published. We would have never published it.
Yeah.
There you go. Exactly.
Yeah, I guess for me, thinking back, covering the ICC trophy in 2001, it was sort of one of the last ventures of the old CricInfo, as it were. And it was great time. It was in Toronto. I was in Canada, so I helped with the logistics, but it was a good opportunity to meet people. Travis was there. Keith Lane, who was a South African coordinator, was there. We had a great time. It was really busy, and it was just so much fun because you were providing information for not India or Australia fans. It was the Fiji fans, the Dutch fans. And I still remember getting messages from Fiji, sitting at the field in sort of rural Toronto, listening to the Fijian team, who were the batting team, singing in 4-part harmony in their little tent as the team batted. It was just a wonderful experience. So that would never have happened if I hadn't got roped into CricInfo back in 1995.
All right, so it's we have been going for over 2 hours now. And the reason I dropped off is we used up 3 gigs of data for my dongle. So I think that might be a first, but thank you everyone in general.
Thank you so much for doing this. Yeah.
No, this was fun. It's basically goes back to what Simon said and I think Murari said it too, is when you were doing it, it was fun. And for me, this is fun. I mean, believe me, this is like a dream come true to just talk to all of you all. But there are 2 people I need to thank in particular. One of them, of course, is Sambit. He's been in touch with me via email. He has shared the link. CricInfo has shared the link, and that really has taken this to another level. But I need to thank Vishal. Vishal has really, really been my go-to guy. He basically helped me get in touch with Simon. He helped me get in Simon, who then got me in touch with Murari. We've been up till 2 o'clock Indian time, private messaging on Twitter, where a couple of times he basically said, I think you need to go to sleep right now. But then 15 minutes later last night, he messages me saying, are you awake by any chance? I said, yeah, I am. He goes, well, we need to get the word out about this. So message this guy from CricInfo, and he'll retweet your flyer, and that should get us some eyes. So I said, well, if you're talking about reaching out to somebody at CricInfo, I was hoping we can get Sambit Bal to make an appearance and say something. He said, okay, I'll take care of it too. And then that's why Sambit's here. So Vishal, thank you for all your help. I've never met him, but I'm sure I would love to meet you. So thank you very much. In conclusion, Simon, since you're the king of all this, is there maybe you can make a closing comment and then we'll end this for today.
That's put me on the spot. It's obviously with great pride that I see 27 years on, this organization is still together. And I hope that all of us who contributed and make it happen feel that same sense of pride, and just well done, guys. Well done. Well done, everyone who helped.